I want to talk a little bit about, you know, Fabian and what it actually is. Like when you're talking about Fabian socialism, right? Everybody hears that word. I'm not too sure if people actually understand what it is. They might just think it was society that was about bring about slow socialism, piece by piece, step by step. But it's not a where did the word really come from? And I don't know if people are familiar with this. I'm just going to go over this really briefly. But basically, it was from a Roman general back during the time when they were in battle with Carthage and Hannibal. And Hannibal was a very good master strategist. He actually developed a double envelopment of, instead of going with frontline assault, he would use double envelopment. He was a very good tactician, and he was able to defeat much larger armies than his own and make them suffer crushing defeats. So even though the Romans were very much, they'd get up a bigger army, and they'd fight him and fight him. They were always, his tactics were something brand new, and it was something the Romans couldn't withstand. So what happened is, after suffering a bunch of defeats, the Romans took a whole nother strategy, and that was to wear down Hannibal by just depriving him of use of the land and minor skirmishes where they knew they would win and that type of stuff, and just keep their army totally intact. So I'm going to go over this very carefully because this strategy works both ways. It's like, there's tracers and there's rockets and there's military weapons. It enables you to locate what the enemy's doing too, and you can apply this same strategy against people who are pushing socialism. And I also like to interject here, that's one reason I don't really like a lot of what Alex Jones does. He's more like direct frontal assault, and he's very much not a person with a cool head. Fabian strategy requires a cool head and constantly chipping away at the enemy. It works. You can actually use it against the ones pushing the rules on you too. And one of the ways you do that is actually to buy silver. It seems like a stupid investment right now, especially if you bought it over 40. But it's going to play out. It's going to play out. Stick with it. Stick with it. I just hope people don't get too far, too deep into it that they can't survive the length of time they need to wait. But that's another way you can fight the powers that be. Fabian socialists used this strategy, but you remember it was used by the Romans against an enemy that was much more skilled than they were at the time. The Fabian strategy this is right from Wikipedia, but I'm going to kind of add a lib on it a little bit too. Just briefly, so people understand what it is. But remember, this strategy works with the people that are fighting for preserving the Bill of Rights in its entirety throughout the country. And we can go global with the Bill of Rights. Nothing wrong with that. Freedom of speech, freedom of defending yourself. It also enumerates that there's other rights that all people have that may not be spelled out in the Bill of Rights. Due process, this type of thing. These are good laws. It should supersede anything by the UN, United Nations, or any global government. We could do this by a Fabian strategy. The Fabian strategy is a military strategy where pitched battles and frontal assaults are avoided in favor of wearing down an opponent through war of attrition and indirection. Now, one of the ways we do that is actually by buying silver. It doesn't seem like it's working right now, but it will. It will. The strategy derives from the name of Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus, the dictator of the Roman Republic. Now, it says the dictator of the Roman Republic. You're kind of wondering, what does that mean? He's the Roman Republic. Well, in times of extreme emergencies, they can, their laws allow them to elect a dictator for a certain period of time to deal with the emergencies, and then afterwards, the dictator would step down. And that's what, in effect, happened after this emergency was over from Hannibal. And he was given the task of defeating the great Carthaginian Hannibal in a body of southern Italy during the Second Punic War. There was 3 Punic Wars. They call them the Punic Wars. Due to Hannibal's skill as a general, he repeatedly inflicted devastating losses on the Romans despite the numerical inferiority of his army. Like, he knew how to, like, make the center of his army fall back deliberately, and he was able to get around the sides. And, you know, the Romans were strictly head-to-head, toe-to-toe. There was no, like, maneuver, and Hannibal had a lot of different maneuvers that he could use to great effect. You know, nobody at the time fought like this. It was head-to-head, toe-to-toe, just bludgeon, beat him to death, that type of stuff. And yeah, Hannibal beat him to death too, but it was the strategy combined that worked, was so effective. But he knew what the hell he was doing. So he achieved two crushing victories over the Romans at the Battle of Trebia and the Battle of Lake Trasimene. So, as long as and see what happened was, this was something like it was a time thing where they're trying to wear out Hannibal. As long as the Italians remained loyal to Rome, then there was no hope that Hannibal could win because he was deprived of all the land, the use of the land. But should the Romans keep on losing battles, their allies' faith in Rome would weaken. So they wanted to avoid any more hard battles. So Fabian basically picked his fights. Small battles, small skirmishes, picked his fights. And basically deprived him and wore him down because Hannibal was in a foreign land. And as long as the people in the area remained loyal to Rome, Hannibal would basically be worn out. This is something to keep in mind for the future at some time. Who the hell knows? Hannibal's second weakness was that much of his army was made up of mercenaries. Now, what does that sound like today? The UN? United Nations and things like that, the global army. And they were made up of mercenaries from Gaul and Spain who had no great loyalty to Hannibal, although they disliked Rome. That almost sounds like a situation in the future. If there's a total breakdown, you might have peacekeepers in the United States, and they'll be mercenaries paid by the global government, right? I mean, this is not too crazy. But, taking the Alex Jones approach to everything was not direct assault. It's a matter of depriving them of use of things they need. Not cooperating with them in any way. But not directly doing it. Like, in other words, killing them by 1,000 cuts. And that's the way it can work over here someday. This is actually a very good strategy to know, because the socialists seem to employ it, but it could be used by the Bill of Rightists also. The opposite of socialism, the way I put it. As the memory of the shock of Hannibal's victories grew dimmer, because there was big defeats by the Romans, and the population gradually started to question the wisdom of Fabian's strategy. You're thinking, just go kick his butt and get him out of there. The very thing which had allowed them time to recover. It was especially frustrating to the mass of people who were eager to see a quick conclusion to the war. And that's what I talk. It's like something, you don't want to jump to conclusions about things. You don't want to act with a hot head. That's Alex Jones. God, I think that guy works for the Fabian Socialists in a lot of ways. I'm going to interject this in here. I know some people don't like to hear that, but if he's legit, I don't like his methods. I'll put it that way. Their chosen replacement was Varro, which is Caius Terentius Varro. He led the army into the debacle at the Battle of Cana. Now, if you remember what happened then, that was, you talk about they had big defeats before that. At the Battle of Cana, they put together the biggest army they ever fielded by far. The Romans did. And they went to fight Hannibal. Well, Hannibal again employed his double envelopment and maneuver strategies against that army, and he was able to outflank him. He allowed the center to fall in. He just maneuvered around him. And what happened was they got crushed into such a small area that they didn't even have room to actually raise their swords or do their normal formations like they normally do. And they were crushed from behind and from the sides. And the bodies that were in the field of Canaan were piled like way over waist high. They were just bodies upon bodies upon bodies. it was like a nuclear blast hit them, and this all happened within a day. So they suffered a very, very tough psychological defeat after suffering other psychological defeats. But what's interesting about the Romans at that time, not what happened centuries later, but at that time, the makeup of the people was probably a hell of a lot different. They did not give up. Stubborn little fuckers, yeah? Anyway, but they did not give up, and even though it was a big psychological defeat. So, actually, at that time, Rome was attacked by Hannibal, but there was a number of people that just took up arms, and they actually stopped him at the citadel. They never took the citadel itself. So, as with the original Fabius, Fabian Strategy is often more popular in retrospect than it was at the time. It was extremely unpopular at the time. And this strategy can work against the Fabian socialists. They're not the ones that thought of this. It was the Romans that thought of it. The ones that were fighting for their own freaking lives. The ones that were actually fighting for their own way of life. You know? They were not trying to implement something on somebody else. But after Hannibal was defeated, and the way he was defeated was actually with using his own strategies. It was Scipio Africanus, that's who was named after, because he actually defeated Hannibal. He used the double envelopment tactics of Hannibal, but to greater skill. It's like you really had to know. In other words, you know, when you're reading it in a textbook, it sounds like it's very simple, but it's not that easy. You got to watch what's going on in the battlefield, and it wasn't like you could just communicate with people in easy fashion the way they got today, or look at things through satellites and all this type of stuff, and they didn't have perfect maps of the terrain and all this type of stuff. So you had to really know your stuff, and you know, a lot of things weren't just written down. It was all committed to memory. So you had to really know your stuff under high amounts of pressure when things are going on. So it's not that easy. You know, I'm reading this in a textbook fashion. You wonder why the Romans just didn't go use a double envelopment tactic. Well, it wasn't that simple to employ or to train people to do in a correct fashion, or when to employ it. But Scipio Africanus actually was able to do a better job of using tactics that were actually developed by Hannibal against Hannibal. And you know, it's my contention is you can use the Fabian approach, which is actually not developed by Fabian socialism. It was developed in Rome by General Fabian, by the general who was depriving Hannibal of a win. As we can deprive socialists and banksters or whatever of a win, we do the same thing. Part of the way you can do this is through buying silver. Now, I know they got this new thing about the weapons coming up, but you know, there's a lot of ways around that. I mean, there's a lot of antique value type things or whatever. I don't know what the hell kind of rules are going to come up with that, but I would think that there's always a way around anything, and it's a matter of fighting them piece by piece by piece to wear them down. You know, I could tell you this. A lot of times, everything that's pushed on the people is funded by some way or another. There's a lot of ways to wear down that funding or wear down those funds. Constant calls to them, you know, you can actually wear them down. So it is a number of little efforts that can keep freedom going, and fighting for the Bill of Rights can be done in a Fabian manner too. So I want people to realize that instead of reacting to the situation, be proactive. You know, what you need to fight for is not so much the Constitution per se in its entirety, but that document called the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. I know they got the 14th Amendment about basically abolishing slavery and all that type of stuff. But if you're applying the first 10 amendments the correct way, you couldn't freaking even have the need for the 14th Amendment too. So, you know, what applies to everybody is across, you know, is the citizens of the United States or the globe. If you want to be a globalist, the Bill of Rights will be the will be the law of the globe. So, Fabian socialism, they didn't think of it. It was thought of in Rome. It was against an enemy that was trying to defeat Rome. And we could think of the banksters or whatever as the Hannibals. And we will defeat them. So, but keep a cool head about things and always keep the pressure on. It's like you don't want to react to what are they coming up with next. Yeah, you do want to react to it, but you don't want to overreact to it. And you also want to be proactive. Anything that helps implement the Bill of Rights is important, and make sure that it's enforced in entirety. And you know, if they go against that, if they start telling you the Bill of Rights, you know, not say, you know, they're already ignoring the Constitution as it is, because the whole premise in the first place was that Constitution limited the powers of government by saying if it's not in the Constitution, the government can't do it. That was the logic. Well, the government can do any damn thing they want. The anti-federalists were 110% correct. That's why you got to stick with that Bill of Rights. That's your citadel. That's your citadel. Be proactive with it too. But the same Fabian strategy that is being used by the socialists can be used by the Bill of Rightists also. Very important document. So, just want to point out where these words came from, and so people understand what's really going on. And you know, the same strategies they use, we can use. No problem. Works both ways.